So today we're going to be presenting at Nashua High School South. We have a few key members of our staff with us. Principal Keith Richards, Mrs. Reynolds, and Mr. Adam Rozemek is here, hiding in the corner. So we're taking a look at the Nashua School District attendance policy. So basically some of the things we're going to be going over is what is the purpose of this product, what are some of the past attendance policies of the Nashua School District, and what is our current policy as of the 2014-2015 school year. We're going to look at a school with similar demographics and socioeconomic status to that of Nashua, some student data, teacher data, administrative data. Going to take a look at extracurriculars and what role they have in our attendance. Also some recommendations, and lastly, conclusions and references. So the purpose of the product is to figure out primarily, is the attendance policy partly the issue or not the issue of why some of our students are struggling academically in Nashua. So what I want to do is explore the evolution of our attendance policies, compare that with other schools as stated earlier, and try to see what recommendations, evaluations, or changes should or should not be made moving forward. So the first policy I looked at was the year I was born, 1989, and I pulled this right out of the student handbook. And it was quoted as, "Skipping class and tardiness to class demonstrates lack of effort, and it directly relates to the grades that they earn," meaning the students. So if a student is absent or tardy, automatically that behavioral decision is being correlated to an academic decision. In order for the student to return to school, the student had to provide a signed letter from a parent. And if the student was absent 6 or more times in any marking period for each course, the student would automatically receive an F. At that point, our grading scale went up to a 64 is failing, so a 64.99 could be rewarded as the highest possible grade, but still resulting in an F for the quarter. The parent or guardian would be contacted through mail upon the third absence. There was an appeal process, and no work could be made up, whether it was a formative assessment, summative assessment, any type of work would all count as a 0 for the day. Jumping ahead to when I was a student in Nashua in 2006 as a junior, this is what I grew up with, where you had 5 days upon return to make up any missing work. There was a participation grade, and it had to be a minimum of 10%. And your first for excused absences, there were no consequences. However, if you were truant for the day and there was a test or a quiz or any other type of summative assessment, those could not be made up. Those would be counted as zeros. So what are our students experiencing 9 years later? If a student's involved in any type of extracurricular activity, they're not allowed to participate that day. Let's say there's a sporting event that happens on a Saturday, but they happen to be truant on Friday. They would not be allowed to participate in that activity either. If it's an excused absence, our principal does have the right to override that decision and allow the student to participate. Once a student has 20 unexcused absences, they can potentially be waived from any type of extracurricular for the upcoming school year, whether it be for dances or any other post-school activity. We do have letters that go home periodically if a student's been out 5 days by January 31st, or at any point once there's been 10 days of unexcused absences. They get 5 days to make up any work, and long-term assignments are just due upon return to school. And the 5 days would also include any tests or quizzes that the student missed. So everything can be made up for a grade. So the school I chose to compare it to was Manchester West. And their policy is very similar to what we had in 1989, where if a student had 5 unexcused absences, they would receive no grade. Again, max of 64.99%. And that's going to be noted on the student's transcript. So when I asked Mr. Motika, who's the principal of Manchester West and formerly an employee of the Nashua School District, what is your attendance rate? And he told me it was 87%. So it'll be interesting. In a few slides, we'll take a look at what Nashua's attendance policy is to try and draw some conclusions. So what I did was I took all the students that we have at Nashua High School, which came out to 1,925. This was as of, I believe, January 22nd. And broke them down into their unweighted GPAs. So we go from 0 to 0.49 all the way up to 5+. And took an average of the number of days of unexcused absences and compared it to the median number of days to try and get two different versions of the average. And while we had a few outliers that made the numeric average much higher for students that were in that 0 to 0.49 range, the medians weren't that much different. They went down a little bit from, say, 11 to 5, but it's not as though the attendance appears to be the only issue that students are having for struggling academically. Clearly, it improves as the grades go up, but not 4 or 5-fold. So then I wanted to talk to the students and ask them, what do you guys know about the attendance policy? So this was from 66 students in all my classes, from freshmen to seniors, foundations to honors. So it really gave a good sampling of our student population. So I asked them, do you believe we have an attendance policy? And 85% said yes, 15% responded no. When I asked them to explain the attendance policy, no students were able to fully explain what it meant. Many students did understand that the sports correlation, where if they weren't in school that day, they couldn't participate in their sporting event. But outside of that, the answers were varied. So here were some of the responses I got from students. When I asked them, what's the penalty for missing school? One student responded, the penalty for missing school is a call home, and that's really it. Another student mentioned the sports. Student number 3 said you missed work and lessons from that day. Freshman student said most likely a suspension after repeated offenses. I got another student that said, I think it's a detention, and one person thought it looked poorly on a transcript. And this was the majority of the responses I got. What was alarming to me was that 24% responded something along the lines of having no idea of what the consequences might be. So then I moved to teachers. And what I did was I surveyed 30 different teachers in 2 of our academies, so it was a random sample of individuals. And I asked them, how familiar are you with our attendance policy? Because it sounds as though there might be some misconceptions among our students. And 13 out of the 30 said they were very familiar. However, in second place, the response, what attendance policy, was right up there with 8 teachers, so 8 out of 30. And then some had heard of it, and then some were somewhat familiar. Those made up the middle. So then I asked a follow-up question, is our policy effective? Overwhelmingly, teachers said no, 93% to 7%. However, the next part, when we started to get to the data, kind of contradicted that statement. I asked them, of your students that failed the most recent quarter, what percentage of those students failed because of poor attendance? Which would be the 76 to 100%, and it's only about a third of their students. The majority did not have attendance problems at all. So while the attendance, in the yellow section is a concern, it's not telling the whole story. There's got to be more pieces to the puzzle. So here's what some of the teachers said in response to the attendance. There were no consequences. Many teachers said, I didn't think we had an attendance policy. Kids know that they can be out of school as much as they want for whatever reason. Students have unlimited number of days to be absent. I would like to see an attendance policy that holds parents and students accountable. And this is one that did concern me very much. It said it could get worse. A kid is smart enough to figure out that they only need to do summative assessments, so they'll show up on those days. And basically meaning that the days that we do formative and practice, they would be absent. And lastly, there are no teeth in the policy. One teacher, though, did stand out amongst the rest and had a very positive thing to say about the current attendance policy, and almost made it sound as though he or she wished it was less punitive. So they stated, I know I'm in the minority in this matter. However, I have a child that would have been denied a high school diploma if we had a daily attendance policy. The same child graduated with honors 4 years later from Pace University, which is a college in New York State. Most of the attendance policies are punitive. They don't allow for the pressures some of our students deal with. Should a child be denied a diploma because they had to take care of a sick sibling one too many days, or because they had to work to pay family rent? Many will say, but they can appeal, but we all know the population this affects will not feel comfortable appealing in front of the Board of Education. So that was one anecdote from a parent who's also been a teacher and could see both sides of the issue. So I then took it from students to teachers to administration. And here were some of the comments I got from our admin team. The National School District doesn't have a firm attendance policy with teeth behind it. It doesn't deter students from skipping school. However, the new vacation policy may help the situations. Several of the comments that you can see here dealt with DCYF and having stricter programs to try and enforce that accountability. And the idea that it may be more effective at the elementary school level than for our older students in high school. So I talked with Lauren Byers, who's the head of our student activities program, and said, well, how about students that are participating? Because if they're not in school, they can't participate. So out of those 1,900 students or so, it was about 900 each, very close, for students that do and do not participate in extracurriculars. So I took all the data and figured out, well, how many students are absent 20 plus days? And what we can see is 98% of students that are involved in school are missing less than 20 days a year. However, students that are not involved, the number drops to 91%. So earlier we talked about Manchester West having a more punitive policy where if you're not going to school, you fail the course, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So these are the numbers from Nashua going back to 2002 all the way up to the first part of 2014. And you can see that every single year, the National School District has had a higher attendance policy than that of Manchester West currently. And actually, as of late January, when this data was pulled, we're at the highest attendance that we've ever been in within the last 12 years. So here are some of the recommendations that I had based upon the data and the interviews and surveys. Students need to be rewarded. And I don't mean dangling a carrot, but I mean recognizing when they're doing something above and beyond. So for one idea I had was front row student parking. So if a student maintains perfect attendance for a quarter, the student could be eligible for a front row parking right up to the gym, rather than walking from Stello's or from a further spot, and the teachers would actually have to move back one row. And this would only be for 10 students. It would go by a lottery system, and every marking period it could rotate. A catered lunch. We could have one of our local businesses come in and cater to the students that had perfect attendance for the entire quarter, using that as a privilege for those students that have demonstrated that they are responsible young adults and future citizens of the state. And club visits. We have an e-block program where students are getting a lot of help, whether it's with academics or they're getting involved in clubs. But we need to increase the amount of visitors that are coming into the classrooms. So what I'd advocate for is for each club to have one representative to visit every single e-block throughout the semester, and really advertising those clubs, trying to get as many students as possible involved. Because the data shows if they're involved and they're in school, then we're doing our job. So a couple conclusions. The real point of this product would be to present either to students, but most importantly, I believe staff, because those misconceptions are out there, that we don't have an attendance policy, and the attendance policy is the only issue, and if we could just fix that, everything would be fine. Because the data shows otherwise. We have a real strict attendance policy, and students are just being told, you're not here, you fail. It's not successful. Teachers should be required to go over the attendance policy with their students. 24% not understanding the attendance policy, to me, is unacceptable. Now, there's a lot that we are doing, whether it's sending letters home after 5 days, 10 days, home visits, court appearances. But I'd like to see the court systems push to have some type of monetary fine for parents that are knowingly breaking the state law of not having their children in school when they're supposed to be. That's something that we definitely want to set the supports in place for parents that financially would have a difficult time paying those fines, but there needs to be a greater level of accountability. Students should always be allowed to make up work for full credit, especially as we move towards competency-based grading. A student's grade should be what they know, not seat time. And I'd like to increase the amount of guest speakers coming in. So it's important for students, maybe that, even if they're not leading towards a career or a specific career, leading towards a four-year university, they need to know what the attendance policy is of jobs that they're going to be applying for in the near future or are currently applying for. And those are some of the references I had. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.